Welcome to the Nations Podcast. On today's episode, we sit down with a good friend of mine, Benji Nolot. Benji's an abolitionist. He's a filmmaker. He works with an organization called Exodus Cry, taking on sexual slavery, human trafficking, as well as the porn industry. And his movies, Nefarious and Liberated, can be seen on YouTube and Netflix. And this conversation's a deep one. It's rich, and I really hope you enjoy it. Well, Benji, thanks for being here. Got to know you last summer, and it's just been amazing following your journey for the last 6 months. And we've been dying to have you on the podcast. So thanks for being here. So here we are. We're two dudes talking about women's issues, right? Facebook's hot right now with people on both sides of the fence. And so that's a little interesting, I guess, for us two guys talking about it. But what got you so involved with the line of work in which you work?
You know, I think that you can debate for or against, some people who maybe lean more conservative, or you have people that maybe lean more liberal with regards to their views of sexuality and what's appropriate. But again, the thing that I would, push back on is the idea of the single story.
Yeah.
And so you take a magazine, for example, like Cosmopolitan magazine. It's the most popular women's magazine of all time. And there's no deviation from the type of image that is presented on the cover of their magazine month after month after month after month after month after month, year after year after year after year. It's the same image of the, objectified, hypersexualized woman with the come hither look. And so I think, again, what we would want to say is not necessarily that, oh, this is so bad, although some people that may be what inherently where they land. But I think, okay, well, even if you think this is a good thing, shouldn't we broaden the message? Shouldn't a magazine like Cosmopolitan magazine be celebrating women who are excelling in business, who are excelling in athletics, who are excelling in politics, who are excelling in academics, who are excelling as mothers, who are excelling in all these other areas of life? And so, my starting point is God's beauty, right? And he's not beautiful because he has pouty lips and long eyelashes, right? There's something inherently beautiful in the human species that's so much more prolific than the way that it is being packaged in our image-based media. And so that's, to me, like that is the fundamental critique, is let's broaden the message so that women who feel drawn to these other aspects of life and society can also feel valued and celebrated and seen and cherished, that a person wouldn't be qualified in or out based on whether or not they have the quote unquote look. Like I remember back a while ago, there was this Kelly Clark, this snowboarder in the Olympics, was just killing it and winning all these gold medals. And I thought, it's sad because she should be on the front of that magazine, but she'll never be on the front of that magazine, right? Because she doesn't have the look. And how sad is that for, it's like if you're an 11-year-old girl and you want to become a fan, well, why isn't she? Well, because she doesn't have the look. And so that to me is the bigger problem. So I see the Super Bowl halftime show as a microcosm of a larger problem in our culture that has a very narrow script regarding what it means to be an empowered woman.
Kelly's a good friend of mine, and I was able to kind of walk with her through her journey of becoming an Olympian, and it's just I had no idea. So cool. Yeah, she's an incredible, like she's one of my all-time favorite heroes. And I remember when the first time I saw her ride a half pipe, I was like, she's riding as big as the guys go, because normally for so long women's sports was like, the men do it at this level and the women do it at this level. Well, she neutralized that pretty quick. And one of the videos I made, my buddy Tommy Shasheen was an Olympic half-pipe rider, and he's like, yeah, Kelly goes bigger than I do. He goes, off the record, of course. but I, with permission, I put that in the movie, and it made it great. But anyway, that's awesome. Kelly's a great example.
There is one exception to that, Shaun White.
Oh, yeah, Shaun's he's not even human.
Everybody does. It's like you watch these contests and everybody's like pushing it to this certain level. And, you know, you're just kind of watching it all unfold. Like, dang, like these guys are really going for it. And then he comes out. It's kind of like how Christian Asoy was back in the day on the half pipes.
Yeah.
Like dudes were getting, you know, 8 foot or whatever. And he comes out and he's like 20 feet above the ramp. Like, and that's how it was with Shaun White. He just launches and you're like, how is he going to land? How's he going to land?
Right. Yeah.
Oh, man.
Well, in little insider trading too, I heard that Shaun might be thinking about going another round at the Olympics.
That would be.
That could be cool. A little comeback. I mean, just 3 in a row. I don't know how you go for a 4th gold medal, but
the Olympics are something special. People obviously again have different opinions about it. I love the human interest stories.
Yeah.
And every time it comes around, I'm like, I'm just gonna take 2 weeks off and watch the whole thing. I rarely actually do that, but I get so drawn into it. And there's something about continuity of athletes over years where it's just like I remember with Michael Phelps, it starts to become part of like this thing that you look forward to of like rooting for that athlete.
Oh, it's so good.
That would be awesome if Shaun came back again.
Yeah. I'd love to see Kelly come back too because, man, I think she's the most winningest snowboarder of all time. She has more medals than Shaun.
So I was on a team back in Kansas City, a worship team. I was the prayer leader for back during that time. And she had this worship leader, Misty Edwards, had just released this album during those Olympics, or like right before the Olympics. So Kelly Clark, before she would run, she'd be like lipping the lyrics. Like she was like listening to those songs. So we were all back in Kansas City just going, go, girl.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, Kelly would always do that. And she'd be singing like, headphones singing.
Yeah. She was doing Misty Edwards. We were like,
that's
go, girl.
Awesome.
And then she won the gold.
That's so
like,
cool.
Dude, the anointing. You ushered in the anointing.
She would always, on her board too, she would always have this sticker that says, Jesus, I cannot hide my love, because one of her main sponsors was like, hey, we're going to pay you all this money. And that's prime real estate. That's like on a NASCAR race car, it's like this, the hood of your,
right.
It's like, if we're paying you all this money, you put our sticker on the top. And she's like, no, I have my Jesus sticker there. And they're like, well, you don't have a contract then. She goes, and she held firm, and they backed down. And so her whole career, she had that sticker. But anyways, we could talk all day about Kelly Clark. And if you don't know who Kelly Clark is, man, watch some of those old videos. She's unbelievable athlete. So well, hey, let's get back to Liberated. You made this film. You have a bullseye on your head. From the porn industry for the films that you've made. Yeah. I just can't. You're an amazing documentary filmmaker. First of all, I really admire your work. But the subject of your work is just remarkable. How did you? What drove you to make the film Liberated, and what did you learn through the process?
Oh man, yeah. So we had just gotten done making a film on global sex trafficking, and we wanted to dig deeper into the underpinnings, the root of why this was going on. So in a sense, our first documentary, Nefarious Merchant of Souls, was like the what of what's going on. It was like just a snapshot again of global sex trafficking. And so coming off of that project, we thought, okay, let's dig deeper into the cultural roots of why this is going on. And we had this idea of doing a documentary about the larger sexual culture in America that was cultivating so much demand for illicit sex. And as one small section of our idea for this film would be going down to spring break and talking with young adults about their attitudes about sex. So I had grown up on MTV Spring Break, and we thought this would be just an environment where young adults would speak candidly about their views of sex and probably have a bit of humor to it. And we weren't imagining it being this super heavy, intense thing. But we went down there and we spent several weeks there. And on the last day of our first trip, the last afternoon, we ran into a situation where there was this larger party on the beach, and there were just all of these girls that were being groped and sexually violated. And we left really haunted and horrified by what we were seeing, and it caused this question to percolate in us about whether this was part of the normal experience of what women face when they go down to spring break. So we felt like we needed to do a deeper dive, and so we went back the next year and the next year and the next year. I think we shot for like 5 or 6 years going down to spring break, and it turns out that that the backdrop of spring break were these instances of young women who were being sexually violated. And so what it became for us was the sort of the collision point between the way in which boys are socialized in our culture, the way in which girls are socialized in our culture, the culture's story about sex, and then the collision point of those three things in the realm of sexual assault and sexual violation. And so so that became a much bigger story. So it was this, like, again, just a side, smaller section of the documentary that ended up becoming its own project and its own documentary. And so it took a while to kind of shape that and even realize what was happening, because we had this vision for this other thing. And so this other film turned into several other projects, and then Liberated became a film about young adult hookup culture. And but again, the stakes being the severity of the violation of sexual assault. And so so we felt that was a compelling reason to dive deep into these issues. And as a documentarian, I just always find it incredibly personally meaningful and somehow satisfying to dive well below the surface level of consciousness where we live our normal lives, and to see what's the root of what's happening, a lot of the things that have become normal in our culture today. And I think Nefarious tries to shine a light on that.
Wow, I think you did an incredible job. Again, just the courage it took to make a film like that. Have you seen much backlash? I mean, again, you're connecting dots of our normal society leading to something, a rape culture. Those are strong connection points. Do you find much pushback on that from the Christian community, from people outside the community saying, no, it's normal. They're just kids. They're just at spring break.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've gotten it from all sides. With Liberated, we ended up losing our largest donor. It was a donor that was giving between $250,000 and $400,000 a year to our organization, and and as soon as they heard that the gospel was not going to be explicitly presented in the film, they pulled their support. And then we've gotten it from the other side as well, like with Nefarious, where we had a group of A-list actors that had pulled together and approached us and said, we want to do a red carpet for your film and blow this thing up and bring the media and get all this financial support behind it, but we need you to remove the spiritual content at the end. And again, it was a situation where we just felt like our obligation was to the story, and not to any one group trying to influence the outcome of whatever this project was supposed to be. And so that, cost us a lot of influence on the secular side of things. Liberated has cost us a lot of influence on the faith-based side of things. But we're not into influence peddling, and I'm passionate about that as a documentarian, because I see so much of the arts becoming a system of conformity. And that's actually antithetical to the spirit of what the arts is supposed to be, right? Like, we are supposed to be challenging the status quo. And I think, especially in the church, we are just very skeptical, of anything that isn't towing the party line. And we're very uncomfortable just to say it plainly, like, in the church, we are very uncomfortable with artists. And because they're nonconformists, because they are critical thinkers, because they will challenge and give pushback and want to see different perspectives, And I think a lot of the way that our church culture and community has been developed is around the idea of like the man of God brings the teaching, and it's really not perceived as an offering, but more as something to be believed. And so it creates these communities of indoctrination, of loyalists, of conformity, and then so then you try to plant an artist in that environment, and they're gonna challenge and give pushback and critical thinking, and so it's difficult, and I wish a lot of that terrain would be reformed and reshaped. I have a lot of thoughts on all of that, but just to say that we don't fit in anyone's box, but I think that's the right box be in as a documentarian. And so, we've gotten it from all sides.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
We have a common interest in the Clapham sect. And when I think of radical followers of Jesus, that's kind of where my mind always goes, because they weren't just rebelling against something, they were like actually moving the needle on culture. And I as soon as I met you, I think we started talking about this, it came up. You're an abolitionist. I love the whole new movement that you're pushing, and the awareness that you're bringing to the Clapham sect, and they were artists, and they really moved the needle on culture through the arts, through these pamphlets and paintings. They started making the culture aware of like what slavery was actually doing. Speak to that a little bit. What got you interested in William Wilberforce, Hannah More, the Clapham sect?
I think they're such a great model for what it means to be a Christian, because I feel like Wilberforce was really following the model and the lifestyle and the spirit of Christ. And a lot, Wilberforce is known for abolishing slavery, but he abolished a lot more than that. He was after animal rights, and he was after prison reform, and he was after so many things. I mean, I can't remember the number of societies that he started or was a part of, but it's like dozens and dozens and dozens of them. And so there was something internally that was going on in him, and I believe that it was his way of understanding what it meant to follow Jesus. And unfortunately, I think so much today we think of Christianity as something to believe instead of someone to become. Yeah. But what Jesus modeled was a way of being in the world in which he was disposed towards the vulnerability of those around him, and compelled by love and compassion to go and to help those who were falling through the cracks, or impoverished, or in need, or sexually broken, or whatever the case may be, right? And his agenda was to manifest love and compassion and meaning and purpose and value into that person's life. And so I think like for us, Wilberforce really stepped into that role in a way that we hadn't seen. And he has, in my opinion, he's probably the greatest social reformer that the world has ever seen outside of Jesus himself. And so we take a lot of inspiration from Wilberforce, because he wasn't just going around trying to get people to believe something. He was actually going out with the intention of loving people in action and bringing change. And so, he's been, him and the entire Clapham sect have been like a huge inspiration to us for that reason. Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hope to take a sabbatical here at some point, hopefully next year. And I want to go spend a few months in England and do more of a deep dive into their world, because I just think that was really they were a huge influence on nations and nations media. We look to them and going, okay, well, God's going to work in the toughest of situations, and he's going to redeem it. He's going to heal it. And we don't know how he's going to do it, but he's going to do it. And we want to be a part of it. We want to feature those stories of when he does do it through people like, the Clapham sect. And Yeah, and I just, like you said, I loved all the things that they were involved with. I mean, animal rights back in,
Unheard of.
Like, and including women in their meetings and everything.
Yeah.
It feels like all the things that we get ripped on in modern Christianity is the things that we kicked the doors down, 250 years ago.
Yeah,
So,
totally.
And then just the knowledge of like Lincoln, basically copying everything that they did, the Clapham sect accomplished with the Emancipation Proclamation 30 years later. Many people are unaware that that's the gospel is what compelled that action. And I think we need to celebrate that as believers.
Absolutely.
I really do. What's the biggest misconception that you have run into in your line of work? Maybe personally, and one that you just see as a believer. And
tease that out a little bit more.
What in your line of work of being a part of identifying this modern day slavery, and what is it in your discovery that you've been maybe surprised by, or that you have learned that's really shifted your worldview?
Yeah, I mean, I think, coming into this work, we were first drawn to it by the overt, visible injustice, I should say, of people whose lives were like kidnapped and then forced into a situation where they were being prostituted out by force. So those kind of like heartbreaking stories of people whose lives were literally accosted and brought into captivity and then used in the most horrendous way and horrific way and violated. And but like I was saying earlier, is always about reverse engineering. And so how does that happen? Like what was underneath that? And as we spent, literally years and years and years doing a lot of boots on the ground investigative journalism, have really kind of, in a sense, rediscovered the whole sex industry, because there's a cover narrative about the sex industry that I think most people are informed by, and it's this idea that there are people who choose prostitution, there are people who are forced into prostitution. It's this idea that prostitution or quote unquote sex work can be empowering for people and sexually liberating and this and that, and that, well, there's sex trafficking, but then there's porn, and porn's the sort of the glamorized version of the sex industry, whereas this is really a subclass of just erotic human beings who, particularly women who have, no other course in life but to just, go and have ravenous sex with anybody who will, who will engage with them.
Right.
And so I think the commercial sex industry does a very good job, and they spend billions of dollars to do this, to create this cover narrative that has created all kinds of misconceptions and myths about what the sex industry is. And so our journey over the past 13 years has really been discovering the deeper truth about the sex industry, and then helping to deconstruct those myths and connect people's consciousness with the deeper truth. And again, this goes back to the work of Wilberforce. He was provoked. His conscience was provoked by the injustice of slavery, and he actually believed that if people in Parliament knew what I know, that they would strike this down and we would abolish this. And so he somewhat naively brought forth his first legislation during his, early term in the Parliament, and it was struck down, right? And because the fact is, people weren't ready to just embrace whatever it was that he was presenting, and so the work for them for 46 years was to shift the locus of thought of the mass consciousness of society regarding this issue of slavery. And there was a cover narrative, at that time about what slavery was. There were cultural influencers and political figures who vehemently argued for the values of slavery. And so it took a generation to shift that mindset, to prepare them for the passing of legislation that would eradicate the system of slavery. And so, the system of slavery and the system of injustice will always resist movements of freedom. And because even after that, then there was sharecropping, and then there was Jim Crow laws, and then, and so there's been such resistance to that movement of freedom. And so I believe that we're in that wrestle today. I believe that human trafficking is one of the 3 major forces of evil holding the planet hostage, and that what we are a part of is a movement of freedom to stand up against this injustice and to eradicate it. But the work is shifting mindsets about the sex industry. Satan roams about like an angel of light, right? He masquerades as this angel of light, and so there's a veil of deception over our society. There's a veil of deception over people's eyes about how they understand pornography, stripping, the sex industry, and that veil has to be torn away before people will be ready to embrace legislation that would eradicate this industry. And so, yeah, I think just generally speaking, that is the work that we have cut out for us.
And with Exodus Cry, where are you trying to break through with all that information? I mean, primarily through film. Are there other ways that you're trying to help people see the truth behind this horrible reality of human trafficking and modern day slavery?
Yeah, for sure. Film is, the kind of the tip of the arrowhead for us, because it's about impacting culture. Culture is created by values, and so this 42 million people trapped in prostitution today. It's $100 billion. Just the sex trafficking component alone, what the ILL would define as sex trafficking, which is very narrow, is $100 billion per year industry. Jeez. So the scope of something like this cannot exist apart from a facilitating culture, apart from social lubricating factors that enable it to happen, apart from a cultural complicity of which we as a people, as a society, have bought into the subjugation and exploitation of the most vulnerable demographics of our population. And so for us, it is about going in and disrupting that facilitating culture with a different message. And we believe in the power of story. That goes back to Jesus, right? Like when he talked to the church or, the religious community, he used Bible verse. When he talked to the world, he was telling stories, and embedded in those stories were kingdom values. And so for us, we are not pigeonholed into any one way of making films. People say, are you a Christian filmmaker? Are you a non-Christian filmmaker? Our thing is like, we're just telling stories. When wherever that story leads us, that's what we're going to tell. If there's a faith element, great. If there's not, great. But our stories will always be embedded with kingdom values. Jesus went about critiquing the culture of his time, critiquing the religious community of his time, critiquing the system of the world, and then promoting values that would liberate people and free them. And so that's what we feel like we have stepped into. If you look at all 3 abolition movements in history, the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade, the abolition of the Congolese at the turn of the century, and if you look at what's going on today with the rise of this 3rd wave of abolition, every single one of them was pioneered by documentary film and by, or I should say, media, of some kind. So is the writing of Uncle Tom's Cabin, and the use of visual media, the Brooks slave ship that Granville Clark drew, and they used these images and these stories to cultivate and to catalyze an abolition movement, a movement of freedom. And it's the same way at the turn of the century, the first ever documentary screenings were of Alice Seeley's pictures of what was going on in the Congo. And they called it, they created a projector, and she went throughout America and Europe taking these photographs of the enslavement of the Congolese and doing what they called magic lantern screenings. And they were the first ever documentary screenings. And there was those screenings that inspired a movement of freedom that ended up causing King Leopold III to have to relinquish his control over the Congolese and brought about the second great wave of abolition. And so today, in our day, it's the same thing. It's being led by media, storytellers, that are going in and facing down, these cultural giants and shifting values and perspectives and mindsets. And so, yeah, we're in the trenches with that and just really passionate about covering these issues in media and documentary film.
Where do you get your stats? I feel like there are a lot of nonprofits out there, and especially in this line of work, it's stat driven. Mm-hmm. And so where do you get your information? Where do you find those numbers?
Mm-hmm. Well, fortunately for us, we have a great. So I would, she's not. I wouldn't actually call her a statistician, but that's kind of what she is. She, our director of abolition, Lila Mickelwaite. She got her master's degree in policy and public affairs from USC, and then went and worked for the United Nations in Geneva, and then launched the first ever United Nations human trafficking project out of New York before coming and working for Exodus Cry. But she's an exceptional researcher, and so we spend a lot of time researching these things, and so yeah, all peer-reviewed journals, International Labor Organization. I would say that all the stats that we cite are always from some kind of credible source, even if those stats are, lean towards being too conservative or whatever. We don't have a point in like trying to exaggerate or sensationalize anything, because our perspective is literally, if this was happening to one person, we'd be doing the same thing. Yeah. And so, but yeah, so all the stats that we cite, and we've got sources for all this on our website. People can check it out at exoduscry.com. We're very, very rigorous about the type of research that we put forth, and everything is always cited. So
that's awesome. Yeah, I greatly appreciate that, and it's awesome that you pay such great attention to that. Talk to me about your on-ramp into ministry, into this calling with Exodus Cry. What was it that, for you personally, that just goes, man, I'm dedicating the rest of my life to this?
Well, I had gone, so for me, it goes way back. I grew up in an unstable home situation, and so I really gravitated towards the arts as my escape, and in a sense, my therapy. And so from really, it was middle school when the arts became a serious part of my life, and then all the way through high school. And then I had a scholarship to the Art Institute of Southern California, but I ended up opting to go to do film classes at Saddleback instead. Did that for a couple years, and then I ended up opening actually a martial arts studio. I needed to pay the bills, and I wasn't seeing how film was going to do that at that time. And so, but yeah, later felt really, really called into just serving God and serving people. And so it was when I found out about the issue of human trafficking in 2007, early 2007. Actually, what's the date today?
Today's February 3rd.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Wow, that is... My mind is just like doing a slow motion explosion. It was February 3rd.
No way.
2007 when I first found out about this issue of human trafficking.
Wow. And here you are.
Wow, that just blew my mind. And here we
awesome.
are. Wow, that is so crazy.
13 years later.
Yeah, to the day.
Wow.
So yeah, it was February 3rd, 2007 when we first found out about this. And that was what really brought everything together for me. I was 30 years old, and it was like my passion for the arts and my passion for God and my passion for humanity were all married in this one thing of going out and telling the story of what was happening to people who are being exploited around the world. So cool side story to this date. It was February 3rd, 2007. My wife and I, we went and visited our friends in the hospital who just had a baby. We were just congratulating them. We were on our date day. This was on a Saturday. And so it was our friend Julie who began to share with us about this thing of human trafficking. And, we had never heard the term human trafficking. I thought, is this like bad gridlock on the freeway, or like what exactly are we talking about here? She's like, no, like millions of people that are being forced into a lifestyle of essentially systematic rape. And it was just beyond anything that you could wrap your mind around in one conversation. And so, but it was that moment where our hearts were pierced with this issue. And little did we know at that time that this would grow, that burden would grow into something that we would give our entire lives to. But years later, I went and I was speaking up at Bethel in Northern California, a large charismatic church up there. And we were doing some meetings that morning with some of their leaders up there. And there was a human trafficking survivor who I had become friends with that was present. And it was her birthday. And so I said to her, happy birthday. And she said back to me, she retorted back, she said, happy birthday to you. And I said, happy birthday to me? Like, what do you mean? And she said, no, it's your birthday too. I go, no, mine's in November. She goes, no. She goes, today was the first day that you found out about human trafficking, whatever, X number of years ago. And I was like, wait a minute. I go, it's February 3rd? And she's like, yeah. She goes, you know how I know that? And I said, no. She goes, I always remembered it because I heard you tell it in a message once that you first heard about human trafficking on February 3rd, 2007. She goes, I always remembered it. She goes, because on February 3rd, 2007, I was in jail because I wouldn't testify against my trafficker because I was afraid he would kill my son. And she goes, and I got on my knees that day and I prayed, God, will you raise up somebody who will expose this injustice?
Whoa.
I was just like, what? So she's there in jail, human trafficking survivor, praying, God, raise somebody up who will expose this injustice. February 3rd, same day, we go out, have this conversation that snowballs into, Exodus Cry and all of our efforts to address trafficking, expose this injustice. And so this date is just very particularly significant. And yeah, that's just strange that we did not organize this. But man, sometimes you just see the fingerprint of God and his providence over the narrative, when we say yes and we just start following.
Yeah.
So
that seems to be, well, first of all, I have goosebumps. What an incredible story. And yeah, there's some seems to be something just so pure about just saying yes to Jesus. As I sit and, talk to so many people who are doing just wonderfully radical things, there's that common denominator. It's like, yeah, I just said yes, and I think that's a message that so many people need to hear, when God gets a hold of your heart, just say yes. And who knows what's going to happen? Maybe you'll run a ministry and make documentaries, maybe, who knows? But it's just such a wonderful thing to just say yes. I see that in the Clapham sect. Wilberforce said yes. And I just see a lot of power in that. But
it takes a lot of the pressure off of it.
Yeah.
And so if we can just give up our conceptions of what we think it looks like to be a Christian based on whatever subculture we've been raised in, and just posture ourselves with the simplicity of the yes, it's so freeing.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to keep going back here, but that was Wilberforce's story of hey, I thought this is what it meant to be a Christian. And he really wrestled with that. Doesn't it mean that it should look like this? And he had to go take that to John Newton and say, I don't know whether to respond to the call of God or to pursue this injustice, going after this injustice. And John Newton's like, yes. Yes.
Yeah.
that is the call of God.
That's
you
right.
know?
That's right.
And but it takes all that pressure out of it. That year, the thing just snowballed. It grew. We started studying and praying into this, and it just grew and grew and grew and grew until that fall, we felt like we have got to do something to put feet to our prayers. And right around that time, this lady approached us who was a widow, and she said, "Hey, I know you don't know me, but God has told me to give you $10,000 to start an organization to fight human trafficking." And that was the seed money that catalyzed us starting Exodus Cry and going on what would be this 4-year journey around the world, documenting the global crisis of sex trafficking, and that the fruit of that being embodied in the film Nefarious Merchant of Souls, which is now available for free on YouTube for anybody that would like to see that. It's on our Exodus Cry YouTube channel.
It came up on my main page the other day.
Nice.
Yeah.
Come on.
I was like, yes,
Woo.
way to go. Way to go.
Awesome.
So how do you sleep at night? I mean, your day job's got you dealing with topics that are so gruesome, so horrific. How do you go home to your family, see your daughter? I mean, how do you sleep at night knowing all this and dealing with this every day?
Since we're in the spirit of talking about Wilberforce on this podcast, we'll just keep going there.
Hey, we'll title this one the Wilberforce podcast. I love it. Keep going.
He said, "If to be feeling alive to the sufferings of my fellow creatures is to be a fanatic, I'm one of the most incurable fanatics ever to be permitted at large." And I cite that because, to be awakened to an injustice like human trafficking can be all-consuming, and I know that for my wife and I, it arrested us, and with a burden, and that we labored with in the place of intercession and just groaning and weeping. This happened a year after we got married, so the first 13 years of our marriage was really like dedicated to this issue. And it's just now that we're like rebooting a new marriage where we're actually like, let's be a married couple and not just, because it is like all consuming. And it's been such a journey of trying to walk this out. There's no manual for it, and you're not expecting it. And, but I know in your experience, you've been places, you've seen things where it haunts you. And for a long time, it was one of those things where you put your head down to go to rest at night and you think, how can I even sleep when this is happening to somebody out there? And so there's definitely times where I've tried to carry this in my own strength and been crushed by it. And I think the lesson that we've learned over these years is that his yoke is easy, and his burden is light. And so it is one of those things of just, there's such high burnout and fighting something like this. And it's kind of a daily thing of having to, release or put this burden back on the Lord and walk in step with Him. And so, there's a lot to say about that. But I think that for us, it's been a journey of really, figuring it out, and also seasons too. Like, there are seasons of birthing. There are seasons, of where the burden's going to be heavier, and then there are seasons where the Lord's like, okay, now step back from the front lines, come back to the general's tent, and rest, refresh, strategize, and then go back out again. And so, I think, just learning to abide and not run too far ahead or get too far behind, and but trying to walk in step with the Lord as we confront this day by day.
What's your spiritual rhythm look like? How do you relate to God? How do you hear His voice? How do you get wisdom, discernment in making decisions about the organization and the implications those will have on people's lives around the world. What does that look like?
Patience, I think. My tendency as a type A kind of driven go-getter personality is to just go, go, go. In the years leading up to the birthing of Exodus Cry, it actually kind of laid everything that I was doing down, and I was on the night watch of this 24/7 prayer movement and just really just building a root system in the Word of God and just waiting on Him for hours and hours and hours a day in prayer. And that, I think, was a really important part of my own personal preparation of like learning how to wait on the Lord and how to wait on God. And because with something like this, it is one of those things where it's like see do, and but also the stakes are higher, and so that's not really a good way to walk this out. And so I think patience, like realizing that getting the quote unquote word of the Lord doesn't always happen in a moment. Oftentimes it happens over a season. It happens over months, where over time you begin to get a sense of a direction. You begin to get a sense of what God's wisdom will look like in this situation or that situation. And so, I think that's been, one of the biggest lessons as far as developing my own spirituality, is just learning that place of patience, and also just relating to Jesus differently. I think it's such a profound privilege for us to be invited to share in the burden of the uncreated God of the universe and what He's carrying. And there was this really formative prophetic experience that this young woman, Jennifer Toledo, had some years back that inspired me. She was in prayer. She was taken up in a vision to heaven and to the Father's house. And in this vision, she was taken to all these different rooms in this, in the Father's house. And there was the spiritual wine cellar where people were becoming intoxicated in the presence of God. And there was the spiritual library where people were stimulating their minds in the knowledge of God. And then there was the intimacy chamber, and it was adorned with the most beautiful things in the entire household. And while she's in there and she's admiring this intimacy chamber, she sees this little wooden hatch doorway that looks out of place. And Jesus is giving her this escorted tour. And she says to Jesus, "What's over there?" And he says, "That room is where I spend most of my time." He said, but very few people will go in that room. She said, he said to her, "You have to be very low to get through the door." And so her curiosity was awakened, and she said, "Well, if that's where you spend most of your time, I want to see what's in that room." And so all these other rooms were populated with people, but she said they went. He took her over to this little wooden hatch door. They crawled through the door, went down a little spiral doorcase, and nobody was in this room. She said there was a solitary chair, and there was windows all the way around. And she said when Jesus took his seat in that chair, suddenly you could see every injustice on the planet all at once. You could hear every single groaning of the prisoner, of the person being raped or violated. You could hear and see every injustice all at once. And she said that room was called the weeping room. So when she asked him, what is that room? He said, that room's where I spend most of my time. You have to get very low to get through the door. Not many people will go there. It's called the weeping room. And she said, she began to weep. She said he spent hours and hours and hours in that chair. And she began to weep. And she began to weep, not just because of the injustice, but because of this beautiful king who would spend his time in that place. And I think of the Garden of Gethsemane where, Jesus is about to pay the ultimate price for sin. And he's feeling the weight of that. And what does he do? He invites his closest friends to be with him in that moment of anguish, and they all fall asleep. And so I just think what a privilege for us to be invited into that place of intimacy, to bear the burden of the Lord regarding this unspeakable injustice that is happening to his creation. And so I think prior to this, I would have interpreted my Christianity as something to believe rather than somebody to become. And I was very preoccupied with having all of my theological T's crossed and I's dotted. But I have come to believe that God cares much more about relational integrity than he does theological accuracy. And that as I've gone on this journey, I don't feel that same pressure to know what I believe about Calvinism versus free Arminianism or free will versus that, or all these doctrinal things that we get caught up and spend so much time and energy on. I really feel like I'm too busy about my Father's business and just trying to, respond out of that love and compassion of Christ to the vulnerability of those around us, and particularly those whose vulnerability is being exploited in the commercial sex industry. So my faith is a profound part and central of my journey in this, and a central part of how we go about combating this Exodus cry.
Wow, love that. That's good stuff. What an incredible vision. Where did that happen now?
It was this young woman, Jennifer Toledo. She now leads a church called Expression 58 up in Los Angeles.
Oh, in LA.
Yeah.
Okay. But this happened back in...
This happened a while ago when she went to Africa. She was going to emptying hospitals, just praying for people, and God was just moving in power on her ministry. And she's got an incredible testimony, but this was an experience that she had, and it just really put a vision in my heart of like, what's important,
Yeah.
The longer I'm alive, the more I realize our life is a vapor.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm going to stand before him one day, and there's so many things that I could have given myself to, but the ultimate currency is the relationship that we build with Christ. And I think the most intimate way to build that relationship is by caring about the things that he cares about. So,
man,
I mean, that sounds cliche, but it's really real, and it's the ultimate experience of being human.
I agree. What's your biggest success story with Exodus Cry? Is there one like person or,
I feel like in this work, there are so many more failures than there are successes. So we definitely cherish those moments where we have a high point or a victory. And so historically we've worked in 4 different capacities of this fight, and today we work in 3. So we work in the realm of social reform, legislative reform, intervention and outreach, and aftercare. And so we ended up moving on from a lot of the aftercare initiatives that we were doing and safe homes that we were operating, because we really felt like that was something that was all-consuming and required a level of dedication that was difficult for us to manage while doing these other things. And so I think that's pretty natural for organization to grow through evolutions and growth, where you really start to dial in on the bullseye of what you're called to in a unique way. And so today, it's these 2 things of abolition and intervention. The abolition side is expressed through social and legal reform. And we've seen incredible victories in every single one of the aspects that we're working in. So with the social reform, when we released Nefarious, it opened up doors for us to impact and influence nations at the highest levels of government all over the world. And
that's amazing.
Time would elude us to go into all of that, but it literally led us into closed door meetings with the leaders of nations all over the world, including right here in the United States, meetings at the White House, meetings, multiple invitations to speak at the United Nations. And then with Liberated, we got one of the best deals you could possibly hope for from Netflix that gave us a huge platform to impact culture. And we did a campus tour to the Oxford and Berkeley and Cambridge and the best universities of our world, and to meet and engage in the ferment of the culture with young adults and students, and won dozens of film festival awards and written up in all kinds of mass media articles, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the social influence part has been profound. We get testimonies, I would say still weekly, of people who have been impacted by our films and it's changed their lives in some way, shape, or form. A lot of them like literally changed their life, where they were doing one thing and they stopped at an about face and now they're pursuing a degree in such and such, or starting an organization. And so, and then in the work of legal reform, we have developed what I believe is the most cutting edge legislation right now being considered in the United States. We developed this legislation some years ago, and I think we're poised right now to see this pass through the House. But it's the Sex Trafficking Demand Reduction Act, and would be a massively significant step forward in the fight against trafficking globally, and the implication that would have for literally the nations. And so getting that passed would be a huge legislative victory for us. But I mean, one example of a legislative victory is like we went up to Canada, the sex workers, the sex pro-sex movement was lobbying heavily in Canada for the passing of legislation that would fully decriminalize prostitution. They wanted to have brothels and the whole 9 yards, and roll out the red carpet for the sex industry in Canada. We went up there by invitation and met with the parliament, screened Nefarious. They pressed pause on their plan, said, give us a year to research what you guys are saying. They did a year investigation into our claims that this would lead to greater sex trafficking, that it was, going to be harmful for their country and for the women, and they came back a year later and they did a full study. They were released as like a peer-reviewed kind of like journal, and said, what you guys were saying was right. They did a 180-degree turn, and they ended up adopting the Nordic model of legislation, the abolition model, which criminalizes the purchase of sex, criminalizes brothel keeping, pimping, all those things that they wanted to, that the sex workers' rights movement wants to advance. And we call them the pimp lobby, because really what it does is give rights to all the rights to the pimps. So that was a huge legislative victory. And then in the realm of intervention, one of the things that pops out, I think we have like the best people working in every aspect of what we do in the world. I really believe that. I'm probably biased, but our director of intervention wrote the book and the manual on how to do intervention, which was learned over years. And this past year, we penetrated a Nigerian trafficking ring and brought the traffickers to justice, and eradicated really a whole pipeline of trafficking that was happening into Moscow. But I mean, there's testimonies literally every single month of women whose lives are being impacted by being brought out of this, or we do outreach to men as well, men averting men who are going to purchase women, or bringing traffickers to justice. And so, there's been a lot of breakthrough. But again, I say, that with a sobriety and a humility, because it is an uphill battle. And I think of this one time that we went down to Costa Rica because we had a tip that there was child sex trafficking going on down in Jaco Beach. And we went down there, we went to this place, the Beetle Bar, and we were looking around, and, we didn't see any children who were being trafficked after about an hour. And so we were going to leave. And as we're getting ready to leave, I see this girl across the room who looks like she's about 12 years old. She was a tiny little thing. I mean, she couldn't have been 5 feet tall. And right as I spot her, I see this man making his way towards her, who's like 6'8", 280 pounds, shaved head, just this huge man. And so I beeline it over there, step in front of him, and I just quickly said, how much for your time paid to take her out? And one other girl, and we get them across the street, and we say, hey, look, we're not here for sex or anything like that. we just, we want to just share with you that, God loves you and he's got a plan for your life and, that kind of thing. And so we end up having this conversation with them and we ask, can we pray for you? We pray for them. The young girl, the 12-year-old-ish, starts crying. And after I'm done praying, she stands in front of me and she starts saying this thing in Spanish over and over. And she got tears coming down her face. And I said to our translator, I said, what's she saying? She said, she's saying, you're an angel. You're an angel. You're an angel, over and over. And I said, well, ask her why she's saying that. And so the translator asks her and she says, he's an angel because tonight was my first night and he was my first customer. And I felt like God sent him here for me. And so situations like that where, you don't, when you, like we talked about earlier, when we say yes, it's a simple thing. And, oftentimes we feel like we have the best plans, the most innovation, the wisest strategy, the most cutting edge social media, whatever. But, God didn't choose the most educated or the most qualified. He just chose people who were going to say yes. Mm-hmm. And I feel so unqualified. But every time we say yes to something that feels too big, the gravity is too intense, the situation too dangerous, whatever, we always see where God works in miraculous ways to bring about breakthrough. And it's not always what we think it will look like, but every breakthrough is significant because we hold such a high regard for human life. And I think that's the message of the gospel really, is that all life is infinitely valuable. And so, Mother Teresa going, had I not picked up that one child in Calcutta, I never would have picked up the 40,000. Mm-hmm. I think it was just a simple yes of I got to pick up this child because this child needs a hug. And then, your heart expands a little bit and then you pick up the next one and the next one and the next one. And, Mother Teresa, when she was 15 years old, she wasn't Mother Teresa. She was just somebody who started to care because of the gospel about human life. And that's all of our journeys. And so we don't substantiate our work based on the breakthroughs, but they're awesome when they happen because all life is so valuable.
What are the telltale signs of someone who's being trafficked? I know with the Super Bowl, they say that's obviously the sex industry goes off anytime that happens. I feel like it's always in the news. And just traveling internationally, there have been almost like public service announcements of, what to look for. What do you see? Are you you noticed a 12-year-old girl and said you knew. So how can we know when we're traveling, when we're on vacation in other parts of the world?
A couple thoughts. That's a really good question. One thought is that every trafficking survivor will tell you that they would have made sure that nobody knew they were being trafficked when they were being trafficked. And so the idea that we can all just kind of get this new pair of glasses that will enable us to see when people are being trafficked, I don't think is very realistic. I think that it's very, very difficult to detect trafficking situations, and that's partly why we developed an entire curriculum and manual to educate people, because it is very it's difficult, and so, but the other thing to say about that is just to understand that anywhere where there's demand, there's going to be trafficking happening. And it doesn't always look like what we think it's going to look like. But demand is everywhere today, right? Because of the hardwiring of the planet through the internet and the mass spread of pornography is awakening this illicit sexuality. And so men are, by the droves, not a few bad apples here and there, but there is a cultural reality taking shape around the nations of men looking for sex on demand, prostitution. And so anytime that's happening, there are going to be third-party interested parties who are exploiting that demand for profit. And so, like in Las Vegas, is a city that's iconic for the idea of the high class escort. But we did a documentary on that, which we haven't released yet. But the reality is that it's all an undercurrent of trafficking, and the people in prostitution, they're told us, like, even if somebody had the bright idea that they're going to come here and be this independent free agent, high class escort, they would get immediately taken by a pimp. It just won't happen. Like, it's an extremely naive thing to believe that could happen when there's this whole infrastructure of organized crime that's running this. And you think those guys are just going to allow you to go do that? Like, no, that's not going to happen. And so, but like I said, it has different, it looks different in different places. In Kansas City, there was a bust where there was a stepfather who had worked out an agreement with a local, it was this, one of those places you see on the side of the freeway that like sells DVDs and stuff, XXX video or whatever. Well, that place had a basement, and this stepfather made an agreement to allow men to come down there and purchase his 14-year-old stepdaughter for sex. So he had a train of these men coming, 25 men, before he was busted. But that was just one instance of one thing that we know about where would anybody look at that guy and go, oh, here's a trafficker? No. But he was exploiting the vulnerability of his stepdaughter for profit. That's trafficking. Right. And so has many shapes and faces, and it looks different in different cities. I think the important thing for people to understand is that in all likelihood, trafficking is going on in your city. In all likelihood, there is a demand. There is trafficking going on. I mean, there's an organization out of Kansas City that we've done some work with where they started to go into communities, church communities, school communities, and to educate people about the predatory tactics of traffickers and the way that they prey on and groom young women to go into prostitution. Every single one of these communities they went into, while they were doing this training, it turned out that there were currently people in that community who were being groomed to be trafficked and did not know it. There was one pimp who said, these girls have no chance against a guy like me because we eat, sleep, think, dream, breathe ways to take advantage of them and get them to do what we want. So these guys are literally spending, it's hard to transport ourselves into a criminal mindset like that. Most of us are not thinking at home, how can I go online and coerce a 14-year-old girl by the time she's 16 to come work for me in the strip club, and bring all the money home. Like, it's just not, it's not on our radar. But for the men who have crossed that threshold into a criminal way of life, that is what they're doing. They are, and so they're working overtime to figure out how to exploit those vulnerabilities. And so it's very difficult to say, like, just this or that will, help you spot somebody who's being trafficked. It goes a bit deeper than that. There are situations, and you can see it more overtly in places like Eastern Europe, where we came across situations where it's like, oh, okay, that's a certain situation where somebody's clearly being trafficked. Right. But I think people over here in the West tend to be a little bit more careful. But there are, go out to any track in any city, and it's not hard to find the pimps. They're out there. And but again, it's such a huge can of worms to open, and that's why we do the training. We're launching our first ever abolition training intensive school this summer. Actually, it's in this September, up in Lake Tahoe. We're only bringing in a smaller group for this. Of people that can apply to come to it, but it's going to be it's called Activate. It's going to be a very hands-on, week-long training in Lake Tahoe on how to fight trafficking for people who are very, very serious about it. It's not for the conference goer. It's for the person who knows they want to be a career abolitionist.
Wow.
And so for anybody that's interested in that, again, just track with us on Exodus Cry. And we're going to be issuing an announcement for that, an application for people to fill out that would like to be involved. And we're going to have, it's going to be an amazing week.
That's awesome.
But yeah.
Very cool. Talk to, on your website, you've got Becoming an Abolitionist yourself. Talk to us about that campaign and how has that been going?
Yeah, that was part of our evolution, our growth as an organization. At the 10-year mark, we felt like we got a really clear strategy for how to build a roadmap to bring an end to this. And so there's a lot of saber rattling that goes on in the anti-trafficking movement, and a lot of stories that are put out that are more sensational in nature or emphasizing, one aspect of this, like rescuing a girl, something like that. And to some extent, we're all for that. Obviously, we want to see people get rescued, but I think that we also need to be asking a question of how are we going to bring an end to this? And how are we going to pull this up by the root? And so we spent years plaguing ourselves with that question and swimming upstream and really trying to figure this out. And it was around our 10-year mark that we felt like we got a real clear roadmap for how to bring an end to global sex trafficking and to deal a death blow, to break the back of global sex trafficking. And so that's what spawned the idea of, okay, we need to create a conversion point for people, sort of the bottom of the funnel, so to speak, to come right into this. And so that's what the idea of Become an Abolitionist started, is we don't want just people to care about this or give money to this or raise awareness to this. We want all those things. We actually want to invite people to become abolitionists. Yeah. And so we created a whole structure to our website that enables and empowers people towards that end. The training component is a big part of that. That's what the idea of the school came out of, where we decided strategically that we don't want to just be on the front lines doing the work anymore, that we want, we'll continue that, but we want to multiply our efforts. And so that's where the idea of inviting people to become abolitionists, doing a training school, to multiply our efforts across the globe to fulfill this, what we believe is like a global mandate and a roadmap to bring an end to this. So there's some real nuts and bolts to that, but that's kind of like the big picture reality. And so the website experience, I think, is amazing now for people.
It really is.
Just super simple and so.
Benji, you're an abolitionist. I can't thank you enough. Make sure to check out the website, exoduscry.com, on all the socials, I'm sure. And man, I just, I admire your work, man. I'm so encouraged.
Likewise.
And I'm so stoked you're living right up the street now. So let's surf together and be abolitionists together.
Totally.
God bless you, brother. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Joel. Yeah, it's great.